The universe remembers everything. Every star that has ever burned, every world that has ever cooled from molten fury into silent stone, every civilization that has risen from dust only to return to it. The cosmos holds these memories in the ancient light still traveling through the void. If you could stand outside of time itself and watch that light unfold, you would see the entire history of existence painted in photons, a tapestry so vast that even the oldest minds in the galaxy have only glimpsed its edges. The Athrani had walked among the stars for 19,000 years. We had witnessed the birth of suns. We had catalogued the death of galaxies. We had built monuments on dead worlds that would outlast the species who would one day evolve to find them. We had believed, with the quiet certainty of those who have never truly been tested, that we understood the shape of things, that we had earned our place at the center of all that was, is, and would ever be. I remember the day I first heard of humanity. I was young then, merely 4 centuries old, still burning with the arrogance of youth. A survey vessel had returned from the outer rim with reports of a species that had just discovered fire. Not metaphorical fire, literal fire. They were still huddled in caves, still painting crude images on stone walls, still dying from infections that our medical science had eradicated before their star had finished forming. I laughed. We all did. Such creatures appeared and disappeared throughout the galaxy with the regularity of seasons. Brief sparks of potential that never quite caught, extinguished by their own violence or the indifferent cruelty of a universe that did not care whether they survived. We gave them a designation in our records, noted the coordinates of their unremarkable yellow sun, and moved on to matters of actual importance. That was 12,000 years ago. Now I stood on the observation deck of the Ascendant Wisdom, the last flagship of the Athrani High Fleet, and watched the darkness between the stars with eyes that had forgotten how to hope. Behind me, the soft blue glow of our navigation systems painted the walls in colors that had once meant safety, home, the warm embrace of a civilization that had mastered the cosmos. Now they felt like funeral lights. My name is Velethnar. I have served on the High Council for 6 centuries. I have negotiated treaties with 17 species, witnessed the rise and fall of empires, and believed with every fiber of my ancient being that the Athrani would endure forever. I was the one who proposed we send the signal. Counselor, the voice came from behind me, soft and respectful, tinged with the exhaustion that had become our people's constant companion. We're approaching the coordinates. I did not turn around. How long? 3 standard hours until we reach the border of their claimed space. Their space. Human space. The words felt strange in my mind, like wearing clothes cut for a different body. For so long we had spoken of humanity as one might speak of particularly ambitious insects, curious, perhaps even admirable in their determination, but ultimately irrelevant to the great sweep of galactic history. We had been so certain of their irrelevance. Have they responded to our approach vector? I asked. Yes, Counselor. They've cleared us for arrival at a station designated Outpost 17. There was a pause. They were very polite. Polite? I almost laughed. The Athrani did not come to other species as supplicants. We did not request permission to enter anyone's territory. For 19,000 years, we had been the ones who granted access.
who decided which species were worthy of our attention, who shaped the political landscape of the galaxy through our mere presence. And now we were running, bleeding, desperate, and a species we had dismissed as primitive was being polite.
Maintain our approach, I said, and summon the other survivors to the council chamber. We should discuss what we will say to them. There are only 7 of us now, Counselor. Admiral Ruthless died during the night.
I closed my eyes. Ruthless. She had commanded our fleet at the Battle of Valenthir, where we had lost 40,000 ships in a single day. She had guided the retreat from our core worlds, her tactical genius the only reason any of us had survived to flee. And now she was gone, her body simply giving out after 600 years of life and 3 months of constant horror.
Then there are 6, I said quietly. Summon them anyway.
I heard footsteps retreating behind me, leaving me alone with the stars and the weight of everything we had lost. The hollow had come from nowhere. That was what made them so terrifying. In 19,000 years of exploration, we had encountered hundreds of species, cataloged thousands of anomalies, mapped the gravitational currents of the galaxy itself. We had believed that we understood the fundamental rules of the universe, that there was nothing left that could truly surprise us.
The hollow proved us wrong in the most brutal way possible.
They emerged from the spaces between dimensions, from the cracks in reality that we had never known existed. They did not communicate, they did not negotiate, they did not even seem to register other species as anything more than obstacles to be removed. They simply arrived, consumed, and moved on, leaving nothing behind but silence and ash.
Our first contact with them had ended with the complete annihilation of the 17th Exploration Fleet, 800 ships gone in less than an hour. We had responded with the confidence of an empire that had never truly faced an existential threat, assembling the largest armada in our history and moving to crush this new enemy before they could establish a foothold in our territory.
That armada was gone now.
So were 17 of our core worlds. So were 94 billion Aetherny citizens.
I had stopped counting after that. The numbers had become too large, too abstract, too impossible to process. Each digit represented families, communities, centuries of accumulated culture and wisdom, all reduced to nothing in the time it took to draw a breath.
And we, the survivors, had fled to the one place in the galaxy where we thought we might find help. The species we had laughed at 12,000 years ago. The universe has a bitter sense of humor.
The council chamber had once been a space of grandeur and authority. Crystalline pillars rose toward a ceiling painted with the constellations of our homeworld, a world that no longer existed. Hovering displays had shown real-time feeds from our vast network of colonies and stations, each point of light representing millions of lives under our protection.
Now the displays were dark. The pillars were cracked from battle damage we had not had time to repair. And instead of the 200 council members who had once filled this space with debate and wisdom, there were only 6 of us, huddled around a single table like survivors of a shipwreck clinging to debris.
High Counselor Ruthless sat at the head of the table, her once silver skin now pale with exhaustion and age. She was the oldest among us, nearly 8 centuries, and she had led our people through the worst of the evacuation. I could see the toll it had taken on her in the tremor of her hands, the hollow look in her eyes.
"We will arrive at the human station in less than 3 hours," she said, her voice still carrying the authority of her office, even if her body no longer did. "I want to ensure we are all aligned on our approach." "Our approach should be simple," said Councillor Thelvrin, the youngest of us at barely 200 years old. "We tell them the truth. We beg for their help. We offer them whatever they want in return."
Beg? The word came from Councillor Harith, whose scorn was a thin mask for his terror. The Aethrani do not beg. We do not prostrate ourselves before primitives who were still learning to forge metal when we were building orbital rings around gas giants.
"The Athrani don't exist anymore," I said quietly.
Silence fell over the table like a funeral shroud. Harath turned to look at me, his golden eyes burning with something between anger and despair. "Councillor Velethnar."
Our homeworld is gone, I continued, my voice steady despite the pain each word cost me. Our fleet is gone. Our empire, our history, our future, all gone. What remains of our species fits on a handful of ships fleeing through space like refugees. We are no longer in a position to speak of what the Athrani do or do not do. We are in a position to survive, if we are lucky and if others are willing to help us. That is all.
Mathras raised a hand, and Harath's retort died in his throat. "Velethnar speaks truth," she said. "I know it is painful to hear. It is painful for me to accept. But we must face our reality if we are to have any hope of changing it. The humans are our best option, perhaps our only option. They have grown significantly in the centuries since we last took notice of them."
"Have they?" Thelvrin asked. "I've reviewed the intelligence reports, but I confess I find them confusing. They've expanded to perhaps 100 systems, which is impressive for such a young species, but their military strength is minimal compared to what the Hollow have already destroyed. They've never fought a war on this scale. What can they possibly offer us that we don't already have?"
I had wondered the same thing. In truth, I had no answer. The humans were a curiosity, nothing more, a species that had somehow survived their own violent tendencies long enough to reach the stars, but who had shown no signs of the military might or technological sophistication that could challenge the Hollow. And yet, something in the reports had caught my attention, something in the way other species spoke of them. "They are survivors," I said slowly. "Their history is unusual. They nearly destroyed themselves multiple times. Global wars, environmental collapse, technological disasters. Each time they found a way to continue. Each time they emerged stronger." I paused. "There is a word they use for themselves. I found it in an old cultural database. They call themselves the children of a harsh mother."
"Poetic," Harith said dismissively. "But poetry does not win wars."
No, I agreed. But perhaps whatever forged that poetry might be of use to us.
It was a thin hope. We all knew it. But thin hopes were all we had left.
Outpost 17 was not what I had expected.
We had seen the stations of the great powers, the crystalline domes of the Valorian Collective, the massive orbital fortresses of the Kethmar dynasty, the elegant spirals of our own Ithrani facilities. They were declarations of power made manifest, designed to awe and intimidate all who approached. The human station was none of those things.
It was functional. That was the word that kept coming to mind as the ascendant wisdom drifted toward the docking ring. Functional, practical, efficient. There was no ornamentation, no soaring architecture, no visible displays of wealth or sophistication. Just gray metal and sharp angles. A structure that existed purely to serve its purpose.
"It's small," the Levrin said. standing beside me at the observation window.
It is adequate for their needs, I replied, though I shared his confusion. Were these really the beings we had come to for help? This crude utilitarian outpost was the face they presented to the galaxy?
"They're hailing us," called our communications officer. "Audio and visual."
Except, Mithras said.
The screen flickered, and I found myself looking at a human for the first time. She was smaller than I had expected. Their species averaged only about 2/3 the height of an Athrani. Her skin was brown, her hair gray, and her eyes were what caught my attention. They were dark, almost black, and they held a quality I could not immediately identify. Not hostility, not arrogance, something quieter, something watchful.
"This is Captain Sarah Chen of Outpost 17, she said. "We've been expecting you. Welcome to human space." Her voice was calm, pleasant even. There was no hint of smugness or triumph at the sight of the mighty Athrani reduced to refugees. No pointed reminders of how we had once dismissed her species. Just simple, professional courtesy.
It was somehow more unsettling than hostility would have been.
"Thank you, Captain," Mithras replied. "I am High Counselor Mithras of the Athrani. We are grateful for your willingness to receive us."
"Of course," Chen said. "Docking coordinates are being transmitted now. Once you're secured, we'll have quarters prepared for your delegation." She paused. "I understand you've had a difficult journey. If there's anything you need, medical attention, food, rest, please don't hesitate to ask."
Difficult journey. Such a mild way to describe the flight from annihilation, the constant terror of hollow pursuit, the slow realization that everything we had built was crumbling to dust behind us. And yet she said it without irony, without any indication that she was diminishing our suffering. She said it as if she understood.
"We will accept your hospitality with gratitude," Mithras said, "and we hope to speak with you soon about the matter that has brought us here."
Chen nodded. "Take whatever time you need to rest first. The conversation will still be waiting when you're ready."
The screen went dark, and I found myself staring at my own reflection in the glass. "She knew," I said quietly.
"Knew what?" Felvrin asked. "She knew everything. About the hollow, about our losses, about why we're here." I turned to look at him. She knew, and she still said nothing. No questions, no demands, no negotiations, just welcome.
Velvrin frowned. Perhaps they're simply primitive. Perhaps they don't understand the gravity of the situation.
"No," I said, "that's not it. Did you see her eyes?"
What about 'em?
I struggled to find the words. They looked like ours do now, like someone who has seen things fall apart, like someone who knows what it means to survive.
I did not understand it then, but I would. The quarters they assigned us were comfortable but sparse. Simple beds, clean facilities, a window overlooking the endless dark. There was no luxury, no attempt to impress us with wealth we did not possess anyway. Just what we needed, nothing more.
I could not sleep. After centuries of perfect rest, guaranteed by Athrani biotechnology, I had forgotten what insomnia felt like. Now it had returned with a vengeance, my mind churning through the same thoughts over and over. The faces of the dead, the worlds we had lost, the impossible task ahead.
I walked the corridors of the station, expecting to be stopped or questioned. Instead, the few humans I encountered simply nodded and went about their business. One even smiled and asked if I needed directions. I did not understand this species.
Eventually, I found myself in what appeared to be a common area. A large space with tables, chairs, and windows looking out at the stars. A handful of humans sat in small groups, talking quietly over drinks, and in one corner, alone, sat Captain Chen.
She looked up as I entered, and I saw recognition in her eyes.
Counselor Valethnar, she said. Can't sleep either?
I hesitated, then moved to her table. May I?
Please. She gestured to the chair across from her.
I sat, suddenly aware of how strange this was. An Ithrani High Counselor sitting across from a human captain in a utilitarian common room, preparing to discuss the fate of civilizations. If anyone had described this scene to me a year ago, I would have dismissed it as absurd.
Your station is impressive, I said, not sure how else to begin.
Chen smiled slightly. You don't have to be polite, Counselor. I know it's not much compared to what you're used to.
I meant it as a compliment. There is an efficiency to it that I admire.
Efficiency born of necessity, she said. We don't have the resources to build monuments, so we build what works.
I thought about that. You speak of necessity as if it were a teacher. It is. She took a sip from her cup, something dark and steaming that smelled bitter. Humanity has always learned best from necessity. When we had no choice but to adapt, we adapted. When we had no choice but to survive, we survived. She looked at me. I imagine you're learning that lesson now.
There was no malice in her words, no satisfaction, just a quiet statement of fact that somehow cut deeper than any accusation could have.
Yes, I said, we are.
Silence stretched between us. Then Chen asked, "Can you tell me about them, the Hollow?"
I had expected this question, had prepared answers for it, but now, faced with her calm, patient eyes, I found the prepared words inadequate. They are nothing we have ever encountered, I said slowly. They do not communicate, they do not negotiate, they do not even seem to exist in our dimension in the normal sense. They phase in and out of reality, appearing where they cannot be predicted, striking where they cannot be defended against.
What do they want?
We don't know. Resources, perhaps? Territory? Or perhaps they want nothing at all. Perhaps they are simply a force, like gravity or entropy, that does what it does without purpose or reason.
Chen nodded slowly. And your weapons are ineffective against them?
Not entirely. We can harm them. We have destroyed some of their vessels. But for every one we kill, they destroy 10 of ours. For every world we hold, they take 3. The mathematics of the war are unsustainable. I heard my voice crack slightly. We are losing. We have lost. All that remains is to determine whether anything survives.
I expected pity, or perhaps fear, the realization that this enemy might eventually reach human space as well. Instead, Chen just watched me with those dark, steady eyes.
You came here hoping we could help, she said.
Yes.
Why us?
The question caught me off guard. You are a spacefaring civilization. You have ships, weapons, resources.
So do a dozen other species, many of them more powerful than us. The Kethmar have 3 times our fleet strength. The Valorians have technology that matches or exceeds the Ithrani at their height. Why didn't you go to them? I opened my mouth to answer, then stopped. Why hadn't we? The Kethmar and Valorians were both closer, both better equipped. Going to the humans had been my suggestion, but I suddenly realized I couldn't articulate why I had made it.
I don't know, I admitted.
Chen smiled, a small, knowing expression that contained no mockery. I think you do know, Counselor. You just haven't let yourself see it yet. What do you mean? She stood, finishing the last of her drink. Get some rest. Tomorrow I'll arrange for you to meet with Admiral Morrison. He'll want to hear your full account of the war." She paused at the door. "And, counselor, don't be ashamed of what you're feeling. Fear is just the mind recognizing danger. What matters is what you do with it." She left, and I sat alone in the empty common room, watching the stars wheel past the window and wondering what she had seen in me that I had not seen in myself.
Admiral James Morrison was not what I expected from a military commander.
He was old, perhaps 60 years by human standards, which was young by Athrani measures, but apparently significant to them. His hair was white, his face lined with decades of something, not age alone. Experience, perhaps, the weight of decisions made and lives lost. He met us in a conference room that was, like everything else on the station, purely functional. A table, chairs, screens on the walls, no ceremony, no symbols of rank or power. "Thank you for coming," he said, as if we were guests rather than refugees. "I've reviewed the data you transmitted, but I'd like to hear it from you directly, if you're willing."
And so I told him. I told him about the first contact at the edge of our territory, about the battles we had fought, each one more desperate than the last, about the fall of Velenthar, our cultural center, where libraries older than human civilization had burned in a single afternoon, about the evacuation of our core worlds, the chaos and the death and the impossible choices.
I told him about the billions we had lost.
Morrison listened without interrupting. He asked questions occasionally, precise questions about the Hollow's tactics, their technology, their patterns of movement, but mostly he just listened, his eyes never leaving my face.
When I finished, the room was silent. 94 billion, Morrison said finally. His voice was quiet. And that's just the confirmed dead.
Yes. He nodded slowly, and I saw something shift in his expression. Not surprise. He had known the numbers before I spoke them. Something else. Something harder to identify.
"The Hollow are approaching human space," he said. "Did you know that?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "No, we did not. Our intelligence on their movements has been limited since you lost the ability to track them. I understand." Morrison pulled up a display on the wall, stars, trade routes, the familiar geography of the galaxy, and spreading through it like ink through water, a dark stain. "They've been moving steadily in our direction for the past 3 months. We estimate they'll reach our outer colonies in approximately 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The words hit me like a physical blow. We had come here hoping to find sanctuary, to rebuild, to perhaps eventually launch a counteroffensive. Instead, we had fled directly into the path of our own destruction. "Why didn't you tell us?" Delevran demanded, his composure cracking. "Because it wouldn't have changed anything," Morrison replied calmly. "You had nowhere else to go, and we were always going to help you." Harith laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Help us? With what? Your 100 systems against a force that destroyed our 17,000? Your primitive vessels against ships that phase through dimensions? You'll be dead in days." Morrison didn't flinch. He didn't even seem offended. "Maybe," he said, "but I don't think so." There was something in his voice, something that made me look at him more closely, studying his weathered face for any hint of bravado or delusion. I found neither, just that same quiet certainty I had seen in Captain Shen, as if he knew something we didn't. "Admiral," I said carefully, "I mean no disrespect, but we have seen what the Hollow can do. We have watched them tear through fleets that took centuries to build. If you believe you can stand against them with the forces at your disposal, I fear you may be underestimating the threat."
Morrison looked at me for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled.
Counselor Velethnar, he said, have you ever wondered why humanity has never expanded further than we have? Why in the 3 centuries since we discovered faster-than-light travel, we've only colonized 100 systems? I blinked at the apparent change of subject. I assumed it was due to limited resources, or perhaps population constraints. No, Morrison said. It's because we've been waiting. Waiting? For what?
For this. He pressed a control, and the display changed. The stars were still there, the geography of the galaxy still recognizable. But now there were new lights, thousands of them, tens of thousands, scattered across human space and beyond. Each one pulsed with a soft red glow, like embers waiting to be kindled.
These are our defense installations, Morrison said. Automated weapons platforms, early warning systems, and concealed fleet bases. They've been in place for over a century, maintained and upgraded in secret, waiting for the day when we would need them. I stared at the display, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. The scale of it was impossible. There had to be 50,000 individual systems spread across a volume of space larger than the Athrony core territories.
That's not possible, Herath whispered. You don't have the industrial capacity. You don't have the population. You couldn't have built this without anyone noticing, Morrison finished. That was rather the point. But why, I asked. Why build all this in secret? Why prepare for a war you didn't know was coming? Morrison turned to look out the window at the stars. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, tinged with something almost like regret.
Because we know what we are, Counselor. Humans, I mean. We know our history, the wars we've fought against each other, the atrocities we've committed, the times we've come within a hair's breadth of destroying ourselves. We're a violent species, a dangerous species. And when we first reached the stars and found that we weren't alone, that the galaxy was full of civilizations far older and more advanced than us, we realized something.
He turned back to face me. We realized that someday something would come. Something terrible, something unstoppable, something that would threaten not just us, but everyone. And when that day came, we wanted to be ready. Not because we're brave or noble or any of the other stories we tell about ourselves, but because we know what it feels like to stare into the abyss. And we decided a long time ago that if the abyss ever stared back, we would meet it with everything we had.
I didn't know what to say. For centuries, we had watched humanity and seen nothing but a primitive, quarrelsome species still struggling to overcome its own violent nature. We had dismissed them as irrelevant, never imagining that beneath that surface, they were preparing for exactly this moment.
You knew, I said finally. Not about the hollows specifically, but you knew something like them would come. We hoped we were wrong, Morrison said. We hoped we were just paranoid, that the galaxy was gentler than our instincts told us. But we planned for the worst anyway. That's what humans do. We prepare for the darkness, even when we're standing in the light.
And now? I asked. What happens now?
Morrison's expression hardened. The regret was still there, buried deep, but over it now was something else. Resolution, determination. Now, he said, we answer. The days that followed were unlike anything I had experienced in 6 centuries of life. The humans called it mobilization. They said the word casually, as if it were just another entry on a list of things to be done. But what I witnessed was anything but casual.
Ships began arriving at Outpost 17. First a trickle, then a stream, then a flood. Vessels of every size and configuration, from small fighters to massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed even the Ascendant Wisdom. They came from every corner of human space, summoned by signals sent through channels I had never detected, organized by a command structure I had never suspected existed.
And they kept coming. How many? Thelvrin asked, standing beside me at the observation window as another fleet emerged from faster-than-light transit. How many ships do they have?
I've lost count, I admitted. At least 10,000, perhaps more.
That's impossible. Our intelligence indicated they had perhaps 300 combat-capable vessels. Apparently, our intelligence was wrong.
I watched a formation of heavy cruisers glide past, their hulls bearing scars that told of previous battles. These were not parade ground ships, not ceremonial vessels maintained for show. They were weapons, built for one purpose, and one purpose only.
And still, they came.
But it wasn't just the ships that unnerved me. It was the humans themselves. I had expected chaos. When the Athrani had mobilized for war, there had been arguments, debates, factions pulling in different directions. We were an old civilization, set in our ways, and coordinating action required endless negotiation and compromise.
The humans were different.
They moved with a unity that bordered on terrifying. Orders were given and obeyed without question. Resources were allocated with mathematical precision. Individual concerns, personal ambitions, political disagreements, all of it was set aside as if it had never existed. In the space of days, 100 scattered colonies had transformed into a single, focused war machine.
I found Captain Chen in the common area again, watching the fleet assembly on a wall display. She looked tired, but there was something in her posture, a tension, a readiness, that reminded me of a predator preparing to spring.
"How do you do it?" I asked, sitting down across from her.
Do what?
This. I gestured at the display, the streams of ships, the coordinated movement of millions. How do you set aside everything that divides you and act as one?
Chen considered the question. Practice, she said, finally. We've been doing it for a long time. Every crisis, every disaster, every war. We learn a little more about how to put our differences aside when it matters. It's not natural for us. Humans love to fight each other. But when something threatens all of us, she shrugged, we remember that we're one species, one family, for all our squabbles.
The Athrani never learned that lesson, I said quietly. Even as the Hollow were destroying us, factions fought over resources, blamed each other for failures, prioritized their own survival over the common good. It's one of the reasons we lost so quickly.
That's not unusual. Most species are like that. Chen's eyes met mine. The thing about humans is we've had more practice at nearly going extinct. It changes your perspective after a while.
Your harsh mother.
Exactly, she smiled slightly. Earth wasn't kind to us. Predators, diseases, ice ages, droughts. We spent 100,000 years fighting just to survive. And when we finally conquered the planet, we immediately started fighting each other. Nuclear weapons, climate change, pandemics. We kept finding new ways to almost wipe ourselves out.
That sounds terrible. It was. But it taught us something. It taught us that when death comes for all of us, everything else stops mattering. Status, wealth, ideology, none of it means anything when you're facing extinction. She looked back at the display. The Hollow are death coming for everyone, so we stop being individuals and start being humanity. It's the only way we know how to survive. I thought about her words as I watched the fleet continue to assemble. Thousands of ships, millions of soldiers, an entire civilization pivoting in a matter of days to face an existential threat. And at the heart of it all, that simple, terrible lesson: when death comes for everyone, you stand together or you fall alone.
The Athrani had never learned it. We had been too successful, too comfortable, too certain of our invulnerability. When the Hollow came, we had fractured instead of uniting, and that fracture had cost us everything.
But the humans had been born in fire. They had grown up fighting, failing, nearly dying, and then getting up to fight again. And now, facing the darkest threat the galaxy had ever known, they were doing what they had always done. They were fighting back.
The Hollow arrived ahead of schedule. Admiral Morrison had estimated 6 weeks. They came in 4. Their advance inexorable, their approach marked by the silence of colony after colony going dark. I watched the reports come in with growing horror, seeing the same pattern repeat that had consumed the Athrani: outlying settlements destroyed, communication lines severed, the enemy appearing where they could not be predicted.
But the human response was different from ours.
Where we had scrambled to react, they were already moving. Where we had debated strategy while worlds burned, they executed plans that had been prepared decades in advance. And where we had tried to hold everywhere and lost everywhere, they fell back deliberately, consolidating their forces, trading space for time.
They're letting them advance? Harath said incredulously, watching the strategic display as human territory shrank. They're abandoning their colonies?
They're evacuating their colonies, I corrected, pointing to the streams of civilian ships flowing toward the inner systems, and drawing the Hollow into a position of their choosing.
It was a level of strategic discipline I had never seen. Every human ship, every station, every installation was part of a larger pattern, pieces on a board that stretched across 100 light years. And at the center of it all, like the heart of a vast machine, was the fleet that had gathered at Outpost 17.
23,000 ships. They had come from everywhere. Battleships from the core worlds, carriers from the industrial colonies, frigates and cruisers and destroyers from outposts so remote I had never heard of them. And they had come with their crews ready to fight, armed with weapons that our intelligence had never detected, organized into a force that moved with a coordination that should have been impossible.
I was on the bridge of the Ascendant Wisdom when the first engagement began. Admiral Morrison had invited the surviving Athrani Council to observe from our own ship, linked to the human command network, so we could see everything in real time.
"Contact in 3 minutes," came the voice of a human tactical officer, as calm as if reporting the weather. "All ships confirm battle ready."
"All ships confirm," came the reply, echoed across 10,000 channels. "We are ready." The Hollow emerged from their dimensional shift in a formation we recognized all too well. A swarm of dark vessels, each one phasing in and out of reality, their shapes constantly shifting as they moved between dimensions. They had destroyed everything in their path. They had broken the greatest civilization the galaxy had ever known. And they flew straight into the human trap.
"Fire," Admiral Morrison said.
I had seen battles before. I had watched the great fleets of the Athrani engage enemies across a dozen wars, had witnessed the elegant dance of ships and weapons that we had refined over thousands of years. What the humans did was not elegant. It was brutal,
overwhelming, relentless. They did not seek to outmaneuver the Hollow, to find clever tactical solutions or minimize their own losses. They simply poured fire into the enemy with a ferocity that bordered on madness.
Missiles by the millions, energy weapons that cut through the void like burning swords, kinetic projectiles accelerated to such speeds that they struck with the force of nuclear explosions. Every human ship was a fountain of destruction, and they held nothing back.
"My God," Felvrin whispered, watching the carnage unfold on our screens. "They're insane."
No, I said slowly, understanding finally beginning to dawn. They're not insane. They're just not afraid.
The Athrani had always fought with an eye toward preservation. We conserved our resources, protected our ships, sought victory with minimal cost. It was the rational approach, the civilized approach, the approach of a species that had never truly faced extinction.
The humans fought like they had nothing to lose.
Because they knew, in a way we never had, that some enemies could not be outlasted. Some enemies could not be worn down or negotiated with or convinced to go away. Some enemies could only be destroyed, and destruction required a willingness to pay any price, to sacrifice anything, to burn as brightly and fiercely as necessary to light the darkness.
The Hollow reeled under the assault. For the first time in the war, I saw them falter. Their dimensional shifts became erratic, their formations breaking apart as human weapons found them again and again. And still the humans pressed forward, their fleet advancing through the fire and chaos, absorbing losses that would have shattered any Aetherani commander's resolve. They lost ships, dozens, then hundreds. Each loss was a flash of light, a burst of debris, lives snuffed out in an instant. And still they came, filling the gaps, maintaining their pressure, refusing to give the Hollow even a moment to recover.
"This is Commander Torres of the Defiant," crackled a voice over the command channel. "We've lost main power. Diverting to RAM."
Confirmed, Defiant. Give them hell. The carrier, a ship larger than our own flagship, surged forward on emergency thrusters, its hull already burning, its crew already doomed. It struck the nearest Hollow vessel head-on, and both ships vanished in an explosion that briefly outshone the local sun. They were dying. They were dying by the thousands, and not one of them hesitated. "Why?" Heroth asked, his voice cracking. "Why do they keep fighting? They're losing ships faster than we ever did. They must see they can't win." I watched another human destroyer sacrifice itself to protect a damaged cruiser. Its captain's last words, a quiet, "For Earth," before the transmission cut off. "Because they don't count victories the way we do," I said. "They're not trying to lose less than the enemy. They're trying to make sure the enemy loses everything." It was a philosophy born of desperation, forged in the fires of a species that had nearly destroyed itself more times than it could count. They had learned over millennia of suffering that some battles could not be won cleanly. Some battles could only be won by being willing to suffer more than the enemy, to endure more, to sacrifice more. And the Hollow, for all their terrible power, had never faced an enemy like this. The battle lasted for 18 hours. When it was over, the human fleet had been reduced by more than half. 12,000 ships destroyed, millions of crew killed. The space around the engagement zone was a graveyard of shattered hulls and frozen bodies, the debris of sacrifice beyond anything I could have imagined. But the Hollow advance had been stopped. More than stopped. Broken. For the first time in the history of this war, an enemy force had engaged the Hollow, and not merely survived, but won. The creatures from between dimensions, the monsters that had consumed 94 billion Ithrani lives, had met a species that simply refused to die.
I found Admiral Morrison in the aftermath, standing alone in a corridor looking out at the debris field. He looked old, far older than when I had first met him. The weight of the dead pressed down on him visibly, and I saw moisture at the corners of his eyes that he was trying to hide.
Admiral, I said quietly, I don't have words. What your people did today, we did what we had to. His voice rough. It's what we've always done.
You lost so many. We always lose many. That's the human way. He turned to look at me, and I saw something in his eyes that I had never expected to see in a human, something I now recognized because I had seen it in my own reflection.
Exhaustion, grief, and beneath it all, the terrible, burning determination to keep going anyway.
The Hollow aren't defeated, he said. This was just the first battle. They'll be back, and they'll adapt. They always do. And we'll have to find new ways to hurt them, new sacrifices to make, new prices to pay. He paused. But we'll pay them, because that's what we do.
Why? I asked, the question I had been afraid to voice since this all began. Why sacrifice so much for a galaxy that never respected you, for species that dismissed you as primitives? You could have hidden, could have let the Hollow consume everyone else and hoped they would ignore you.
Morrison smiled, a tired, sad, genuine smile.
Because we remember what it's like to be alone in the dark, he said. We spent 100,000 years as the only intelligent species we knew about, looking up at the stars and wondering if anyone else was out there. And when we finally found that we weren't alone, that the universe was full of life and civilizations and wonder, he shook his head. We couldn't let that die. Even if the galaxy doesn't appreciate us, even if nobody ever thanks us, we couldn't just watch it all burn.
He looked back out at the stars.
Your people sent a signal, a desperate cry for help aimed at anyone who would listen, and humanity heard it. He paused. We always answer. We always have. Because we know what it's like to scream into the void and pray that someone is listening.
I stood beside him in silence, watching the aftermath of the battle that had changed everything. The humans had paid a terrible price. They would pay more before this was over. I knew that with cold certainty. But they had also done something that the Ithrani, for all our wisdom and power, had never accomplished.
They had fought the Hollow and won. Not through superior technology, not through ancient knowledge or vast resources, but through sheer, stubborn, relentless refusal to give up. Through a willingness to sacrifice that came from a species forged in the fires of its own near extinction, again and again, until dying for a cause became as natural as breathing. Admiral, I said finally, when this is over, if we survive, the galaxy will need to know what happened here. They will need to understand what humanity did.
We didn't do anything special, he said. We just did what we've always done. Survived, fought, refused to go quietly into the dark.
That is special, I said. More special than you know.
The war continued for 3 more years. The Hollow came again and again, adapting their tactics, shifting their strategies, probing for weaknesses in the human defense. And each time, humanity met them with that same terrifying combination of sacrifice and determination, of tactical brilliance and stubborn refusal to yield.
Other species began to rally. The Valorians, inspired by human resistance, committed their remaining forces to the fight.
The Kethmar, shamed by their initial hesitation, sent ships and warriors to stand beside the humans. Even the remnants of the Athrani, we survivors, we exiles, contributed what we could, our ancient knowledge finally finding purpose in support of those who had saved us.
But it was humanity who bore the weight. Humanity who took the worst losses, who fought the hardest battles, who sacrificed more than any other species would have dreamed possible. They burned through generations of soldiers, entire populations volunteering to fight, a species spending itself without reservation to hold back the darkness.
And in the end, they won.
Not easily, not cleanly, not without scars that would take centuries to heal, but the Hollow were pushed back, their incursions stopped, their presence in our dimension sealed away behind barriers constructed from technology and sacrifice and the blood of millions. I was there when Admiral Morrison, now Fleet Admiral Morrison, commander of all Allied forces, gave the announcement that the war was over. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, surrounded by the representatives of a dozen species who had come to witness the moment, and he spoke with the same quiet calm I had noticed on the day we first met.
The enemy has been defeated, he said. Not destroyed, we don't know if that's even possible, but contained, stopped, prevented from taking anything more from us.
There was cheering then from humans and aliens alike. Celebration, relief, joy at the end of a nightmare that had consumed the galaxy for years. But I noticed that Morrison did not smile. He simply stood there, looking out at the stars, his eyes holding that same weight of sacrifice I had seen after the first battle.
Later, when the celebration had moved elsewhere and the bridge was quiet, I approached him.
You don't look like a man who just won a war, I said.
We lost millions of people, he replied. Billions if you count everyone. The Athrani, the Valorians, all the species that fell before we finally stopped them. He shook his head. That's not a victory. That's just survival.
It's more than survival, I said. You saved us, all of us. A galaxy that never appreciated you, never respected you, that laughed at your species when you were still learning to use fire. I felt the emotion building in my chest, centuries of pride cracking under the weight of what I had witnessed. And you answered anyway. When we sent our desperate signal into the void, you could have ignored it. You could have said we deserved what we got, but you didn't.
Of course we didn't, Morrison said, sounding almost surprised by the suggestion. You were dying. You needed help. What kind of people would we be if we turned away from that?
And there it was, the heart of humanity, laid bare in a single question. A species that had spent its entire existence fighting the elements, fighting each other, fighting extinction itself, and had somehow emerged from all that violence with an instinct not for conquest, but for compassion.
They did not help us because we were worthy. They did not answer our signal because we had earned their respect. They answered because answering was who they were, because they had learned, in the crucible of their own brutal history, that survival meant nothing if you achieved it by abandoning everyone else. You answered with fire, I said quietly. Our desperate signal, and you answered with fire.
Morrison looked at me, and for the first time since the war began, I saw the ghost of a smile cross his weathered face.
Fire is what we have, he said. It's what we've always had, the first thing we ever mastered, the thing that made us human. And when you called out into the darkness, asking if anyone was there who could help, he shrugged, we brought what we had. We brought fire.
I stood with him in silence, watching the stars that humanity had fought so hard to preserve. Stars that would shine on because a species that had once huddled in caves afraid of the dark had refused to let that darkness consume everyone else.
They had answered with fire.
And the galaxy would never be the same.
I am old now, older than I ever expected to be, having believed for so long that the Hollow would end all our stories before they could be finished. I have watched humanity take its place among the great powers of the galaxy, not through conquest or domination, but through the simple fact that when the darkness came, they were the ones who stood against it.
Other species still underestimate them. They see the rough edges, the primitive origins, the violent history that never quite goes away. They make the same mistake we made all those millennia ago when we first discovered them painting on cave walls.
But I know better now.
I have seen what humanity is capable of when pushed to the brink. I have watched them sacrifice without hesitation, fight without hope, and endure without relief. I have seen the fire that burns at the heart of their civilization, not the literal fire they mastered 100,000 years ago, but something deeper, something forged in the crucible of a harsh world and harsher history.
They are not the most advanced species in the galaxy. They are not the most ancient or the most powerful, but they are something else, something that matters more than any of those things.
They are the species that answers.
When we sent our desperate signal into the void, hoping that someone might hear, it was humanity who responded. Not because they owed us anything, not because they stood to gain from our survival, but because they knew what it was like to cry out in the darkness, and they refused to let that cry go unanswered.
They answered with fire. And the galaxy will remember that forever.